Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Hope you all enjoyed your Thanksgiving leftovers for Shabbat dinner. Sometimes it's really easy for me to write a sermon. I'll have an idea that I think about for days, sometimes even weeks, sometimes months, and then I can easily just connect it to the Torah portion or the holiday. I can write it down 15 minutes. Sometimes, if I'm really stumped, I can look at the commentaries of what the sages wrote about, or I can look at contemporary rabbis, their thoughts on the Parsha, and it might be a little harder to come up with something, but eventually I can come up with something. And then there's times, dear friends, when I got nothing. It's like I can't think of a new idea or a new way to interpret, and I'm just stumped. This is called writer's block. People ask me all the time, where do you come up with your ideas for these sermons? And the real answer, friends, is desperation. Doing this is harder than it looks, and doing it well, which I'm not saying happens all the time, is especially really hard. These past couple days, inspiration for Parshat Toldot has been hard to come by. With Thanksgiving and the boys out of school, it's been really difficult to think about Torah, and sometimes the hardest parshiot to write about are the stories that everyone knows, because it seems like everything has already been said about them. So I decided to reread the episode that we get in this week's Parsha, and you're probably familiar with it. The patriarch of the family, Isaac, is weak and old, and his two sons, Jacob and Esau, couldn't be more different. We're told that Esau is a man of the field. He likes to hunt and catch game, whereas his brother Jacob likes to hang out in his tent all day. Now, we've already seen Jacob coerce his brother into giving up his birthright over a bowl of lentil soup, but now we're about to see something more nefarious. Esau is described as being hairy and having red hair. By the way, the word for Hebrew, and Hebrew for red, is Adom, and the descendants of Esau are literally called the Edomites, so the red people, the red ones. While Isaac is on his deathbed, his wife Rebekah hatches a plan for Jacob, which is her favorite son, to wear goat skins and approach his father under the hairy guise of being his brother Esau. Now, apparently, Isaac is like the cartoon character Mr. Magoo. He can't see very well, might have a degree of dementia, but the plan totally works, and Jacob tricks his father into giving him his older brother's blessing. As I mentioned before, we've all heard this story before, and I struggled to come up with something new and insightful about this dysfunctional family. So I thought I might pivot and talk about something else in the Parsha when something happened. I was reading my kids a book the other night. They have a book of Grimm's Brothers fairy tales, and every night recently, we've been picking a story to read from. We've done Jack and the Beanstalk, Rumpelstiltskin, The Princess and the Pea, all of the classics. But then we got to another story that we have all heard a million times, Little Red Riding Hood. Of course, in this whimsical little tale, Little Red Riding Hood is depicted as a young girl who is skipping through the dark forest on her way to deliver a basket of goodies to her grandmother's house. The villain of this story is the cunning wolf, who encounters the girl on her way to the cottage, and after speaking with her, the wolf hatches a plan of his own. The wolf decides to go ahead of Little Red Riding Hood and reach her grandmother's house before she gets there. And depending on what version of the story you're reading, the wolf either swallows Granny up whole or she escapes and hides in the closet. But the same thing always happens next. The wolf puts on Granny's clothes and pretends to be Granny. And then we have another Mr. Magoo moment. Little Red Riding Hood finally arrives at the cottage, only to find the wolf in bed dressed as Grandma. Grandma, what big teeth you have! The better to smile at you with, my dear. Grandma, what hairy arms you have! And while I was reading this part of the story to my kids, it finally dawned on me that these two stories, Jacob and Esau and Little Red Riding Hood, are incredibly similar. Not only do both stories have characters who are called Red, Esau, Riding Hood, Little Red, but the crux of the plot is deception through putting on another family member's clothing. So what does this mean? What am I getting at? Well, after much contemplation, here it is, friends. Jacob is the wolf. Jacob is cunning like the wolf. Jacob is deceitful like the wolf. Jacob is smart like the wolf. As the younger, scrawnier brother, Jacob knows he's no match for Esau physically, so he knows that he has to use his wits if he's going to get ahead. And that's exactly what he does. Now, if you think that I am purely making something out of nothing, I kind of am. But allow me to present a little more evidence to my theory here. If we fast forward from this Parsha to several Parshiot from now, where Jacob is the one on his deathbed, he starts giving out blessings to all of his sons. You can look this up, Genesis chapter 49. He gives out a variety of blessings that many scholars have done many things with. But the one that I'm most interested in tonight is the one that Jacob gives to Benjamin, which is his youngest son, the youngest brother. Now keep in mind, Jacob was also the youngest brother, so he understands what it's like to be the little guy. This is the blessing that Jacob, the wolf, gives to his wolf son. Quote, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at the evening dividing the spoil. Jacob blesses his youngest son to be like a wolf, like him. And it seems as if the prophecy came true. You see, Benjamin and his offspring, notably called the Benjaminites, were quite ravenous, but they were also noble and courageous like wolves. Ehud was a character from the Tanakh. He's a Benjaminite judge who is described in the book of Shoftim, Judges, as having a right withered hand. So he makes a custom spear and conceals it on his thigh and uses his left hand to stab the evil Moabite king and free Israel from Moabite rule. Jonathan, my namesake, was also a Benjaminite, and unlike his father Saul, he loved David and showed courage to stand up for his beloved friend, rescue him from the tyrant king. But last but not least, Queen Esther, she also hails from the tribe of Benjamin, and she saved her people from extinction during Persian rule. You see, sometimes, friends, it's good to have wolves in the family. We oftentimes like to think of wolves as being provocative and aggressive, but the thing about wolves is that they travel in packs. They are very loyal to their family, and so are the Jews. So what am I advocating tonight? Well, before I tell you, let me tell you what I'm not advocating for. I'm not endorsing deceiving people. I'm certainly not saying you should deceive your family members, especially by means of being Mr. Magoo. But what I am saying is sometimes to get things done, to make things happen, we all have to be a little wolf-like. Maybe we shouldn't huff and puff and blow little piggies' houses down, But if we're backed into a corner, sometimes it's important that we show our fangs. If we are on the brink of extinction, sometimes we need to devour the prey and divide the spoils. And I'm sure we could all look at this fairy tale and poke a bunch of holes into my argument for how these stories are or are not similar, but that's not the point. I hope what I showed you tonight is that the themes from the Torah can be found everywhere if we just look closely enough. In movies, stories, and even children's fairy tales, because at the end of the day, we're all wolves in sheep's clothing. Shabbat Shalom.